Brett, we're jumping into college football now. It's time to get going as we head into week 2. Week 1 showed a few matchups that were some challenges early on. I mean, Alabama-Miami was potentially supposed to be one of those. Did not end up being the case. Penn State upset Wisconsin, though. Week 2, we see some of these challenges again, but a lot more week 2 matchups seem to be tune-up games to me. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess you could say that, Higgins. It's not the same slate that we had in week 1 with a lot of Power 5 crossover games and stuff like that, but there's still a lot of good football going on. One game, for instance, that I'm on that I'm very excited to watch just as a fan of college football is an old Big 8 rivalry game. I know Jerry Jones has to be ecstatic about this matchup because Texas is taking on Arkansas, and that one should be a lot of fun, Higgins. These teams are no longer in the same conference, but they were a long time ago, and they will be again in the future. There's some bad blood there still. But I think Texas is a much better team right now. Steve Sarkisian came out of the SEC last year, so he's seen Arkansas before. He knows Coach Pittman down there at Arkansas, who was again in the SEC prior to Arkansas at Georgia. So these guys have crossed paths. They've coached against each other before. There's not really going to be unfamiliarity there. Maybe a little bit amongst the players, Higgins, but I think Texas, better team, better quarterback, better running back, better wide receivers. So the 7.5 doesn't really scare me off. It's a rivalry game. I think both teams will come out ready to play. I might even be interested in the over in this game, but I'm not so sure about the Arkansas offense. And last week wasn't going to tell me very much based on their opponent. So I'm staying away from that, and I'm just taking the Longhorns minus 7.5. I also like the play, Higgins, because the juice right now is only minus 102, which is a lot nicer than that minus 110 number sometimes.
It really is. I mean, it's basically even money that you're getting back. And Brett, I like that pick. Texas in week 1, they faced off against Louisiana Lafayette, who was a ranked matchup. Texas still covered their minus 8.5 in that game. Now, Arkansas did cover theirs, but they faced off against Rice, who, like you mentioned, it's a little harder to tell how good Arkansas was from that. So I agree with backing the team that already had a bit of a test to prove themselves against with a ranked matchup like that. Very interesting, and grabbing it at that minus 7.5 before it looks like it's going to move to that minus 8 is probably a smart call as well. I'm going to be looking at a ranked matchup, though, between Oregon and Oregon and Ohio State. I almost said Oregon State. That game's a little bit later on in the year, excuse me. Oregon versus Ohio State. This is number 12, the Ducks facing off against the number 3 Buckeyes. And I really like the over in this. It's 63.5. And if you think about how these teams played last week, there's a little bit of an incentive for why that over should be an easy hit, in my opinion. First off, Ohio State scored over 40 points against Minnesota, and I think they're able to do that again against Oregon. Oregon hosted Fresno State in week 1. Fresno State was able to put up 20-plus points against Oregon, so I don't see Ohio State being held to really under 30 points. I could see them maybe getting to 35, maybe 42. And the Oregon Ducks, they, as their quarterback said, quote, weren't firing on all cylinders. And so there is a lot to work on in practice this week to prepare for that Ohio State game. I think they're going to come back out a little bit more resolute. Ohio State also allowed 31 points to be scored against them by that Minnesota Gophers team. So I think that defense still has a lot to prove to me before I back away from some overs in this Ohio State, in any Ohio State game really as we head forward, because Ohio State's offense is always known to be a juggernaut. They scored 45 points to start their season off. I think they're going to be a 40-point scorer pretty regularly again this year. And if Oregon can put up 20-something points, get 3, maybe 4 touchdowns, it's an easy hit on the over in my opinion. So 63.5. The number sounds big, but don't let it get you too worried. I think that there's potential for a 70-point game here.
Yeah, I think that one could be pretty high scoring. You mentioned Oregon's quarterback Anthony Brown. He's an interesting player to watch, Higgins, because a lot of people thought maybe, just maybe, he could be a Heisman dark horse. He runs a little bit, he throws, he's a fifth year senior. He has plenty of skill around him. CJ Verdell came back in the backfield, a great pass catching back for Oregon. So there's a little bit, I'm not going to call it real Heisman hype, but there's some people that have some long shot bets on Anthony Brown, and a win in Columbus, Ohio would go a long, long way to his Heisman candidacy.
It would definitely bring that name up into a little bit more of a mainstream conversation than a long shot conversation, potentially. I mean, it wouldn't jump him to the front of the pack with Spencer Rattler and those types of names by any means, but it could move him to a middle of the pack, other quarterbacks still with a possibility. I agree with that. Another game, though, that I'm looking at, Brett, and we talked about one of these teams during Moneyline Magic, Toledo at Notre Dame. And Toledo, I'm sorry, but you faced off against Norfolk State in week one. You didn't prove anything to me by showing that you can score 49 points. You won 49-10 against Norfolk State. I don't buy it. And so Notre Dame played an excellent 3 quarters against Florida State. They were up by 18 points heading into that fourth quarter, did not execute in that final stretch, still ended up getting the win. But if you heard head coach Brian Kelly after the game, he even caught some flack on this for social media, but he made quite the statement about the team's execution. So I expect the team's execution to be a good deal better in this matchup as they're hosting Toledo. This is a 17-point game for Toledo, Toledo's an underdog by 17 points. So Notre Dame, who was winning at the end of the third quarter against Florida State by 18 points, does not concern me with a 17-point spread. I am taking the Fighting Irish at minus 17, and I'm taking it right now because I wouldn't be surprised if we see more action flood onto that as we get closer to Saturday and see that number move.
Yeah, I could potentially see that number getting a little bigger as well, Higgins. Notre Dame, a fairly public team, so if you like the spread, betting it early is not a bad move on a team like Notre Dame. Higgins, I'm hopping over to a late kickoff, a kickoff right around your dinner time, Higgins. Utah at BYU, one of my favorite yearly games, the Holy War, one of the best names for a college football game. This year, the game is being played at BYU. BYU starts a true sophomore, Jaron Hall. And meanwhile, Utah starts a battle tested quarterback, Charlie Brewer, who played at South Carolina, played at Baylor, now finds his way all the way to Utah. Utah's the ranked team here, Higgins. BYU's the home team in a big rivalry game. They had the better year last year. They're still trying to prove that it's their state. They're fighting for the invite to the Big 12. I think a lot rides on the plate here for BYU. And also, BYU beat a Pac 12 team last week. They played Arizona. So, I think Utah, a bit of a step up in competition, better quarterback play for sure. Maybe some better athletes than Arizona. But I think this is in a big rivalry game. The 6.5 is too much. And at even money, Higgins, no way am I turning that down. Even money plus points on the home team in a rivalry game? Yes, sir. Lock me in.
Now, listen, I'm glad that you're excited for it, but I'm going to play some devil's advocate because I think I might find myself on the opposite side of this by Saturday, Brett, because BYU had a lot of attention on themselves last year, and once that attention really kind of came into full focus when BYU did their schedule change to go face off against Coastal Carolina and everything, they didn't really perform as well. The attention still is there with BYU, even though they're not ranked, and BYU was a 13.5 point favorite over Arizona in week one. They did not cover that. They are 6.5 point underdogs against Utah right now. I don't know if I buy that either because, I mean, BYU, after all that attention, the national attention focused on them last year in 2020, they ended their season just 1-3 against the spread. So they only covered against Boise State in that -5.5, 51-17 route against Boise State, but they didn't cover against Coastal Carolina. They didn't cover against Western Kentucky. Didn't cover against San Diego State. So didn't cover against Arizona either. I don't know. The proof needs to be a little bit more in the pudding for me with BYU getting back to the name that they had last year and the recognition they had last year. I need to see it. So if I'm on that game, I'll probably find myself with the Utes. But I love your energy with that pick.
That's just honestly Higgins, in my opinion, right? I don't claim to be an expert crunching all the numbers. I'm watching these teams play. I'm gathering a lot of stats and info for my day job, right? And trying to give everyone the best information possible. That's a bad line for a rivalry game. If you're the home team, you should be getting 3 points to begin with. So maybe they think this is a 9 point game, but you're still going to give me a touchdown as a home dog for an in state rivalry game. I mean, this isn't like Syracuse and Buffalo, right? These teams are much more on a level playing field. And I have to be honest, Higgins. I think the number is too big for the circumstances. Now, look, everyone loses bets here and there. You laid out some great information. BYU's not been covering spreads. Their last 4 games, they've only covered one. But I can argue slightly different team, opening week of the season, quarterback's first start. Tough to cover 2 touchdowns against the Pac 12 school. So, there's some reasoning for that not covering last week, but yeah, you have every right to be nervous about BYU. I'm all in.
Well, Brett, surprisingly, Utah versus BYU, it's not going to be the only in state rivalry game that we're even going to talk about here because I'm going to be moving a bit closer in your direction, back towards the East Coast. Staying in the Midwest, though, staying in the landlocked areas, we're going to Iowa. The Iowa Hawkeyes traveling to face off against the Iowa State Cyclones. This is a top 10 matchup between these two teams. It's their 68th time facing off against each other. And Brett, it's really interesting when you look at the history of these two teams because everything points at you should be backing Iowa. They win 2 of every 3 times that these teams have played. They've won the past 5 times that these teams have played. They've won 7 of the past 10 times that these teams have played. But they didn't play in 2020 because COVID did not allow their interconference play. So the yearly streak since 1977 that they had playing against each other, that Iowa had dominated, that streak was broken. Iowa State focused on themselves last year. Who knows? Can they come back and respond? They're -3.5 point favorites in this game. And that scares me right now as of Wednesday night, Thursday morning, Brett, as we get closer to Saturday, because everything I laid out points to why maybe Iowa should be the favorite. But to the 3 point home field advantage that you just mentioned with your last pick, that basically makes this one a pick 'em if it wasn't at Iowa State. But if you look at how these two teams have played last year and last week, they both hang their hats on their defenses. Both of their offenses barely eclipsed 300 yards on the day in week one. Their defenses were able to hold both of their opposing teams under 300 yards. Iowa State won a 16-10 game. Iowa won a 34-6 game against a ranked Indiana team in week one. I think that these defenses are going to show up again. It's in Iowa. It's the battle for that state. I really do expect that this is going to be a showdown. This is going to be some of that classic hard-nosed football that we hear from the Midwest all the time. So that over-under is sitting at 46.5. Now, that's an NFL over-under number, and typically if you see that in college football, it raises a flag and makes you cautious. But I'm taking that under. I'll say it again. I'm taking an under. I'm
I
taking an under,
know.
Brett.
I know. Well, you laid out some good reasons why. It is the battle for the Cy Hawk Trophy, Higgins. Not as good as the Holy War. Still a decent name. But I gotta say, Iowa State's roster, top to bottom, probably the better roster this year. Brock Purdy, Breece Hall, both probably going. I mean, I don't want to put too much pressure on them, but like both probably going relatively early in the NFL draft. Probably day 2 picks for both of them. Um,
A chance to
mean,
work into a day one if they get a big game like this or have a really strong season. But I'd agree.
absolutely.
I'd agree they are day two, but they're borderline. They could be a late first round if someone falls in love with them.
Yeah, someone could fall in love with them for sure. Brock Purdy could have a great year. That would all help. But Iowa Higgins did not have a great offseason. They had some trouble with their trainer, and former players came out angry. So I haven't really gotten a great read on Iowa. They came out and dominated Indiana last week. That probably shocked a lot more people than we expected, right? We thought that would be a close, good game, but it was a blowout from the beginning to the end. And, that has some people saying, oh, well, maybe this 3.5 is wrong. Maybe Iowa's a better team than we expected. And we just kind of wrote them off because of offseason troubles. But I have no feel on this game, Higgins. I think your underplay makes sense. But, that's probably enough college football today because it's NFL week 1 this week, Higgins. And we got to hop into that.
It is. There is one game that I do want to just mention real quick that I'll be looking at on Saturday, but I'll give that pick out on our social media so we don't have to spend too much time on it. But Appalachian State versus Miami, that's going to be a good game. That's going to be a good game. Now, Brett,